very, very welcome. Ulf Hannelius, CEO of Diamyd Medical, and you're going to give us an update investor presentation for Diamyd Medical. And what I understand, you will speak English?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you, Ulf. So the show is yours, and here's the remote.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this presentation about Diamyd Medical. I'm the CEO. My name is Ulf Hannelius, and Diamyd Medical is a Swedish biotech company listed on Nasdaq First North Growth Market. We are focused on diabetes, and especially autoimmune diabetes, so type 1 diabetes, where we have 2 clinical phase assets that we are developing and where we have come very far now. And I will give you highlights about the company, a bit about the market. I will talk about our assets that are in clinical phase, and then I will also go a bit more in depth into the development program around our flagship asset, the diabetes vaccine Diamyd, and talk about the risk and especially the de-risk development program, given some of the very interesting insights and results that we have come with the past half year. So we first go into the market opportunity and first the problem and then the market opportunity. And here I call it an untapped blockbuster market opportunity. So untapped because there are no disease-modifying therapies today on the market. There's nothing that actually changes the disease at its core, can change the disease course. We have insulin since 100 years back. We have technical devices that make the lives for type 1 diabetics easier, but there's nothing that can resemble anything like a cure, which is the vision for our company, to long-term really cure this disease. It's blockbuster market because it's a relatively common disease, and it's a big problem, and if we look at this here, it talks about the problem and really the size of the problem. So diabetes, as you well know, it's very common in the world, unfortunately, and there's more than 460 million people today who have diabetes, and this is just growing. What we are focusing on is, first of all, the 10% of these diabetics who have something called autoimmune diabetes. That's type 1 diabetes, and it's also LADA, which is a form of type 2 diabetes, which is an autoimmune. We also see that 15% of diabetics have something called insulin-deficient diabetes. It's a non-autoimmune disease, but these patients have too little insulin production left, and we see that our assets can also make a difference for this segment. So around 25% of all diabetics we see that we in the future can actually address as a market. If we then look specifically at type 1 diabetes, this is based on a health economic model and a study that was published earlier this year. It's a US study that has looked at the health economic impact type 1 diabetes has in the US and globally. And the study shows that there's expected around $30 billion every year that the disease costs society. And if you extrapolate to the global setting, it translates to around $90 billion or more every year. So the problem is large, but it obviously translates into a big market opportunity. And this same study says that a disease-modifying therapy, so a therapy that really changes the course of the disease, can have a multi-billion-dollar impact every year in the US alone. We then look at what are our solutions that we are developing for this problem. So we have 2 disease-modifying therapies in clinical stage. They're first in class, which means that they are new technologies. There's nothing similar on the market today. And we are addressing primarily type 1 diabetes, but we have a smaller clinical trial ongoing in autoimmune type 2 diabetes as well. And these are our 2 clinical assets. First of all, our flagship, Diamyd, the diabetes vaccine. It's an antigen-specific immunotherapeutic, which means that we are using the active component in the therapeutic is an antigen, in this case a recombinant protein called GAD. What we want to do here is reprogram the immune system by presenting this protein to the immune system so that the immune system realizes that this is nothing foreign, it's nothing strange, it's nothing that it should attack. And we want to transform the immune reaction so that it becomes a benign reaction rather than a malign reaction that we have today in autoimmune diabetes. And GAD is one of the most important antigens in type 1 diabetes. We are in phase 2b clinical development, and we will have top-line results coming from the phase 2b trial later in September. And we already have a lot of clinical data around this asset, and especially important, we've had results that we presented last December, both from a pilot trial, which looks very promising, and also from a large-scale meta-analysis where we have identified responder patients. And I will go into this a bit more in detail a bit later. If we look at our second asset, Remigen, it's based on GABA, which is a small molecule. GABA is also present in the pancreas, where you have the insulin-producing cells. And preclinical research, so research in animal models, has shown that GABA can actually stimulate the regeneration of insulin-producing cells. We now have a clinical trial ongoing at Uppsala University, where we are testing this hypothesis. Can we actually translate those preclinical results into the clinic? Here we also have already results from the first stage of the trial, a dose escalation, where we surprisingly but positively can show that GABA seems to be able to prevent hypoglycemia, and hypoglycemia is drastically low blood sugar levels, which is a big problem in type 1 diabetes, but also in several patients who have type 2 diabetes. So in patients don't react adequately when blood sugars go down. The organism reacts too slow and too late, and they can go into a lethal condition when blood sugars fall too low. And what we show here in preliminary is that GABA seems to be able to prevent this from happening, so the patients actually start behaving more like healthy individuals when it comes to hypoglycemia, which is very interesting and which gives us a potentially second indication for GABA, which we are now pursuing. But I will now go a bit more in depth into the clinical development program for the diabetes vaccine, and especially highlight why I see that we have a significantly de-risked development program. First of all, this is an important finding that we first press released in December last year, and which was published in Diabetologia a few weeks ago. This is based on data from more than 500 patients that have been participated in 3 previous placebo-controlled clinical trials. One trial that was run in Sweden, one which was run in the US, and one large-scale phase 3 study which was run in several European countries. The hypothesis was that the HLA genotype of the patient influences the effect of the vaccine, and especially the HLA genotype that is linked to a GAD autoimmunity, which is known that specifically this genotype will influence the effect. And lo and behold, the analysis shows that you get a significant influence of the genotype, and that the effect in patients who have this what's called HLA-DR3-DQ2 genotypes, it's clinically significant and relevant. And even more interestingly, we see a dose response effect. If you add additional injections, you get an even better response in these patients. And it's important to show that these are about 50%, so about half of all the patients in this data had the genotype that seems to respond the best to our therapeutic. And this is even more relevant since this was published in January this year. It's a discussion paper from Diabetes Care with a lot of the key opinion leaders in type 1 diabetes as co-authors. And here they discuss that we as a field need to start addressing the heterogeneity of the disease. We can't expect that there's one single therapeutic that will solve the whole problem. We need to start addressing subgroups and what's called precision medicine. And interestingly enough, they talk about 2 main subgroups. One subgroup which has an autoimmunity against insulin as an antigen, and one group which has an autoimmunity against GAD as an antigen. And these 2 subgroups are associated with different HLA genotypes. So what we show in our meta-analysis that we get an effect, significant effect in the subgroup that is associated with the GAD autoimmunity, which makes perfect scientific sense. We use GAD as the active component in our vaccine, and we show that patients who have a disease that is more driven by GAD actually get the best effect of a GAD-specific therapeutic. So this further validates our findings. The scientific field is very much aligned with what we have shown. Further, what we are now doing, we are evaluating a new mode of administering the vaccine. Previous trials used subcutaneous administration, which means that you inject the vaccine underneath the skin. The protein is then picked up by immune cells and transported to the lymph nodes where the immune reaction happens. What we are now doing is that we are actually injecting directly into a superficial lymph node. And it's 1/5 of the dose that we are using subcutaneously. Results from a pilot trial, which were released in December last year, indicate that the effect from this mode of administration is significantly enhanced compared to subcutaneous. And our phase 2b trial now, which will read out in September, will then answer this question in a more thorough manner. And thirdly, which is very important to highlight, especially in these pandemic times, is the safety profile of our vaccine. This graph shows how many patients have been treated in total in all our clinical trials so far. About 2/3 have received active treatment and 1/3 have received placebo. Importantly, there's no difference in adverse events between placebo and active treatment. And the most common adverse event is only the local injection site reactions, so pain or rash around the injection site. What's more, if we look at the dropout rate in clinical trials, so how many patients actually drop out of a clinical trial before it's fully finished, we have less than 1% of all patients that have ever been part of our clinical trials have dropped out. And this can be compared to vaccine trials overall, where it's estimated on average that 12% of patients usually don't finish the full trial. And in metabolic and cardiovascular disease trials, it's around 7% that don't finish the trial. We have less than 1%, which translates to actually fewer than 10 patients have ever dropped out of our clinical trials, which is a further testament of the safety profile. And this then translates into this kind of a matrix where on the x-axis we have the convenience and the safety of the therapeutic, and on the y-axis we have the efficacy and the benefit to the patient. You obviously want to be in the top right corner, best potential safety, and it should be a convenient treatment, but also make sure that you have the best possible benefit. Our antigen-specific technology, so Diamyd, doesn't require any hospitalization. It's only 3 injections 1 month apart. It's basically painless, and the patient can go home after about 1 hour of the treatment. And the benefit seems to be what we now know, clinically significant and relevant. So what we know, if we summarize what we know about the diabetes vaccine, is that we today know that with a very high likelihood, patients who have this HLA-DR3-DQ2 haplotype get a very good benefit of the vaccine. We further know that additional injection further enhances the effect of the vaccine. We know that the safety profile of the vaccine is very good. And now fourth, we have a hypothesis based also already on the proof of principle results from the pilot trial that intralymphatic injections further enhance the effect of the vaccine. And we will get the results now from the phase 2b trial in September that will answer this question. And it's important to know that the results that come in September, they will include most of the important parameters. So the top line results will include stimulated C-peptide, the endogenous insulin production, HbA1c, which is the blood sugar levels, how much insulin the patients are using, and also then adjusted blood sugar levels. You adjust them by how much insulin. And even more importantly, these results will be presented both for the whole patient population, but also for these HLA-specified subgroups. And what this gives us is a possibility to really have the possibility to navigate how do we see the upcoming step. So if the Diamyd 2 results, we will obviously look if they are significant now. If they are significant, we will further see if it's the HLA subgroup that seems to drive the whole effect, or if we get a broader effect, which is possible now with intralymphatic administration. If it seems to give a broad effect, we have the potential to go forward with intralymphatic administration in the full patient population in the next trial. If we see that it's the HLA subgroup that is driving the effect, we will then see, well, is that a significant or it's a strong trend that it's the HLA subgroup. If it is a strong trend or significant, we will compare it to the subcutaneous data we have in the company and see is intralymphatic superior to subcutaneous or not. If it is superior, clear case to go forward with the subgroup with intralymphatic administration. If they seem to be comparable, we will decide also based on commercial IP and manufacturing aspects to see which administration route we will pick for the final phase 3 trial. So this is really important since we have different routes to navigate depending on what the data today, what we already know about the data today and the data that will come in. And further, we have the potential to look if we should add a booster also into a phase 3 because we have very interesting results from the pilot trial now from December last year showing that a fourth intralymphatic injection seems to even increase insulin production in the patients. And we also had a dose response effect in the meta-analysis, which supports addition of an additional injection. So the pipeline looks very interesting with the results coming now in September and with everything we already know about the vaccine, and also very interesting results already around Remigen, which we are now ongoing with a long-term follow-up in that trial. Financials, we have end of last May, we had around 80 million in the company with a monthly burn rate of around 3 million. This burn rate will increase because we are now ramping up the company and really investing because of all the positive things that are happening in the company. And especially here we have taken control of the manufacturing of the active component in the diabetes vaccine, Diamyd. So we are setting up our own manufacturing facility in the northern part of Sweden now to manufacture GAD65, and this will also give us opportunities long-term to start manufacturing other projects, both internal and external. And here we have hired a facility manager and protein production scientists, and we have also in the company very recently hired a regulatory affairs officer. So we are investing in the company, and I want to end with this slide and highlight that we have the privilege to work with some of the real experts, both on the clinical side and the scientific side in type 1 diabetes. And here on the slide, I want to also highlight Professor Mark Atkinson, who has followed the company for a very long time as a scientific advisor, and he joined our board a bit more than a year ago, which has really strengthened the company further. And with that, I'd like to end my presentation, and you're welcome to take a look at our webpage where you have a lot of both the corporate deck, our annual and quarterly reports, and other facts around the disease and what we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ulf.
Thank you.
Very exciting to say the least. But I pre-warned you about this a bit, so you had some time to think about it. But we took the liberty of adding one slide here.
Yes.
And this is a full page from the dominating Swedish business daily, Dagens Industri. It's from 17th of August, talking about Diamyd Medical, and of course, since they cater to investors, they talk about the share price going up 1,100% in 3 years. Let's see if I get the facts here from the top of my mind, and then you could talk about what's right and what's wrong in this. But what they're saying is that May 11 was a disaster for Diamyd back in the days, 9 years ago. The conclusion from the phase 3 study back then was that this did not have the desired effects, and market value crashed from the results of that phase 3 study. Now, also said here is that you in last December, 10 months ago, you published that you went over the results, and in large subgroups there was significant results. And this spun a big interest in Diamyd Medical. And these findings from you were reinforced in a scientific paper a few weeks ago in August. So that's the timeline, and now there's a huge interest in Diamyd Medical. Did I get this right, or
Yes.
Can you add something?
No, it's correct, and I would say that everything in this article is correct. Nothing wrong here. So, and it's I would like to, of course, switch not say that the phase 3 was a disaster. What we actually show today is the value of having access to that amount of data, because all of that data has made it possible what we are doing today. We have really learned from that. So it was, and the overall, that trial, if you look at those, it didn't reach the primary endpoint when it comes to statistical significance, but if you really start looking at the analysis, everything is pointing in the right direction. But the effect size wasn't big enough. So what we now do, we could see then that there were some trends that, for example, these HLA genotypes, there seemed to be a better effect, but it wasn't convincing enough in that single trial. But when we then can add the data from the US trial that was run and from the Swedish trial that was run, we get enough sample size to actually show convincingly that yes, here we have the effect of the vaccine, and it's clinically significant and statistically significant. And we can also see that if you add injections, you get an even better effect, and it makes complete scientific sense because it's a rational subgroup. It's nothing that we've pulled out of thin air. So that's really, I would say that phase 3 has made it possible what we are doing today, and that's the whole point of doing clinical trials, to learn on the way. And sometimes the original hypothesis is not correct, but we've been able now to really focus on the correct hypothesis. So it looks very promising now.
Okay. But why did it take 9 years? The data was basically there, 2011, and Diamyd, this was before your time, but Diamyd and the whole scientific community said this is not working. And then 9 years later, there's a subgroup as large as 50% that has a significant effect. How can that be?
Well, the easy answer is obviously that data without, like, what you call the domain knowledge is nothing. You have to be able to form the correct hypothesis. And so what has happened is that the scientific field has matured over time. Back in those days, everyone knew that HLA genotypes, it's a significant, or the most significant genetic risk factor for getting type 1 diabetes. But the whole thing that these can actually, HLA can also be associated with these specific kind of disease subtypes was not as known. But a good example is what I showed in my presentation, that in January 2020, there was this discussion paper discussing about this heterogeneity of type 1 diabetes, that we have to address subgroups. And this was, it only shows that the scientific community publishes something like that almost simultaneously when we published our meta-analysis results. We were, of course, not knowing that what these guys were writing, what kind of paper, but it happened almost simultaneously, and that sort of shows that it requires some time for the science to mature, and then when you have the data and you realize that, wait a minute, maybe this is the correct hypothesis, then you address that hypothesis using your data, and then you can get magic happening. So that's why it had to take its time. So there's a lot of work that has been done over the years since 2011, but
yeah, thank you. If I give you the slide, can we go back to the studies and trials you are now doing? You had a Diamyd 2 on one slide. Here.
This one.
Yes, this one. We had several questions via email to ProHearings about this, and what the investors are asking us to ask you is, do you have enough for a market approval now, or is these steps necessary? Do you have enough to go on as it is? And also guide us some more on the phases, like here, Diamyd 2. That's all the way from 0 to 2B.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit about that?
So what we have today is what I presented. So first of all of the data from previous trials, and especially then this meta-analysis identifying the subgroup of responders where we see a very high likelihood of the vaccine working very well. And then we have the pilot trial results from the small intralymphatic trial, which seems to show that it can enhance that mode of administration, enhances the effect. And then we get the results coming now from the phase 2B trial, which will also address this intralymphatic administration. What we said publicly is that we will evaluate the potential to go earlier to market as well. And there is this potential regulatory pathway called conditional marketing approval in Europe. There's something a bit similar in the US called accelerated approval, and you also have other kinds of programs called breakthrough indication and fast track, which give you benefits when going towards market, or faster review processes, for example. So what we will do is we will definitely evaluate these possibilities, especially now when the results are coming, and if there are really strong results from Diamyd 2, we could have the potential to go earlier to market. Regardless, you will need to do a phase 3, and that's why I also highlight that we are already designing the phase 3. That's something that will need to be done anyway, but there's always a potential to go earlier, but that's something we will evaluate depending on what the results look, if we feel comfortable in that data package. And obviously also you need to consider commercial aspects. But sometimes when you go too fast to market, you either don't get the price you want to get the price. You would get a much higher price if you wait for phase 3 results, for example. And this is something that we are also always considering partnering aspects as well, because in our business model is to out-license at least part of the geographic market to someone else who can help us take it in the best possible way all the way to market. So we don't want to do things that might compromise the true value in the asset by going too fast to market, for example. But it's something we will definitely evaluate and see if it's possible. If it's possible, is it actually the best thing for the company to do or not?
Okay. So one final question thinking about this. These are Corona times, and we're all diving into vaccines and what they are, and Anders Tegnell in Sweden is teaching all of us that a vaccine can be more than one thing, and it's not certain that it's just stops everything. But let me phrase it like this. If these effects are what you hope for and what you found with this significance in what you published in December 19 and later was validated in August, what will that mean for people that have diabetes type 1? Will they get rid of it with your help, or what will happen?
Well, the long-term mission in the company is to cure the disease, and that's something that drives the purpose of the company. As I see the results we've shown, the results are always on average results when you take into consideration all the patients and what was the average effect. You will always have patients who get a really good benefit and some patients don't get that good benefit, but on average what we see in the meta-analysis that it's a clinically relevant and statistically significant result. What that will mean to the patients based on research is that if you can preserve your own insulin production, or at least slow down the progression, you will have several years where the body can help in maintaining the correct blood sugar levels. And research shows that even a small amount of insulin production that you have as a patient will reduce your long-term complications by up to 70%. So these common complications like cardiovascular problems and neuropathies and eye problems and So there's a lot of these problems that you can get rid of, or at least reduce, if you can preserve your insulin production. Then, which is interesting if you only think about at least, it's only 3 patients that we gave this booster injection to in the pilot trial with intralymphatic, but they started increasing at least initially. 1 year later, they were still at the same amount of insulin production they were a year before. But that sort of shows that maybe there's potential for some patients to start not only stopping their disease or halting it, but maybe turning the disease progression. And with the genotype results we have, finding these responders, I can only see that once we are hopefully on the market, we will be able to collect so much data that we can start tailoring the treatment and really making sure that patients get the best possible benefit and hopefully actually turn the disease so that we can start curing the disease.
Okay, so another exciting phase will
Yes,
come
definitely.
when it goes like we hope for. This succeeds and you get big data collection from
Yes.
diabetes type 1
So
patients.
we already opened up for this precision medicine concept by identifying genetically responders, and I can only see that this drives the whole pharmaceutical field now, to be able to identify patients where you get the best possible benefit. Because traditional drugs, maybe sometimes you only have 20% of patients benefiting, 80% don't get a benefit, but everyone gets the drug. The future is about really targeting the ones that you know will get the benefit and treating them, which will be much more efficient for society and for the patients as well.
Okay. And with that, I think we conclude.
Yes.
So Ulf Hannelius, CEO, Diamyd Medical, thank you a lot.